All right, let's move on to the next part here. This was some major news that happened just yesterday. Combines with some even worse major news. I'll start with the major headline coming overnight from our allies in France. Let's go ahead and put this up there on the screen. In terms of nobody asking for this and yet being floated anyway, President Emmanuel Macron at a major meeting of the European powers to mark the 2-year anniversary of Ukraine's invasion now is floating the idea of Western troops on the ground. He says, quote, "There is no consensus today to send in an official endorsed manner of troops on the ground, but in terms of dynamics, nothing can be ruled out." This is absolutely extraordinary news to me. News to a lot of people in NATO. Very quickly, Krystal, overnight, the Kremlin reacting, saying that if this is in fact true, then war with the United States, with NATO, is, quote, inevitable. Here's what they say, quote, "In that case, it wouldn't be likely inevitable. That is how we assess it." That is according to the official spokesperson for the Kremlin. So Macron basically floating an entire war with the NATO alliance. I do find it interesting that immediately, the Germans actually smacked him down. Olaf Scholz, the Chancellor of Germany, immediately putting out a tweet in German saying, just so we're clear, there will be no Western troops or NATO troops that are being sent into the country. But just goes to show, you know, the brain worm is there, even with reality on the ground. They're like, well, Ukraine's losing. America won't ship them anymore. Ammo, we literally don't have the capacity to send ammo. So what's left? It was inevitable. I didn't think they were stupid enough to float it, though, especially somebody in a democratic country. But if anything, I'm happy about it. Please run on it. Put it to the American people. Should we send Western troops to save Ukraine on the battlefield? I think I know what that answer would be.
NATO chief Stoltenberg came out to also rebuff Macron's comments, although I think his phrasing is very interesting. He says there are no plans.
Yes, exactly.
For NATO combat troops on the ground in Ukraine, but Macron didn't say there were plans. He said that this is something that needs to be kept on the table and, you know, a theory that needs to be discussed. He didn't say that there are active plans to do it. And listen, it makes some logical sense if you are in the, you know, extreme pro-Ukraine camp where you genuinely believe that Russia intends, you know, next is going to be Poland on their list and they're going to, you know, try to have this incredibly expansionist imperial project. And that it's going to force a NATO conflict down the line anyway. So if you're looking at the situation, the battle situation in Ukraine, and you realize like they don't have a chance to win unless you do have something like NATO and U.S. and French boots on the ground in the country, that's how you end up saying like this. I think it's extraordinarily revealing about how dire the Ukrainian situation actually is right now and how out of ideas they are for changing that, save for, you know, something that would be incredibly, not just unpopular, but insane, foolish, reckless, et cetera, as is being floated here.
What's really fascinating to me is that if you read, so I talked previously about how Germany, well, their parliament, you know, they have a democratic system over there, Krystal, where major things actually get floated to the legislature and they get to vote and decide how and whether they should send certain types of cruise missiles. It's a really interesting concept. We should maybe want to try it. Well, in their parliament, they overwhelmingly voted not to send Taurus cruise missiles to Ukraine. And the German chancellor gave a very good justification for this. He says, listen, these are longer range missiles. They could use them to strike Russia. But more importantly, the Ukrainian troops are too incompetent and not well trained enough, and to actually employ these on the battlefield would require German troops on the ground to operate these cruise missile systems. Thus, I am not putting Germany in a place where we're going to become an active combatant. He says, quote, "We will not become a party to the war." I have to come back to the strategic logic. The entire point of our supposed, you know, why we got to back Ukraine to the hilt is that if we don't stop Putin here, then he's going to continue into NATO countries. Then why are the major powers in NATO, like Germany, the largest economy on the continent, largest economy out other than Britain, in the NATO alliance, why are they so cautious? And they're not shipping everything they've got because they don't believe it. It's one of those where, at this point, the Ukrainians, have been roughly hung out to dry. They've been screwed.
Yeah,
I think, from day
Absolutely.
one. They're like dangled here. They're basically being used as pawns. Vast majority of the prime age courageous males, they're all dead and or amputated now. And so now I think we're really starting to get a taste of what this war is really all about. You see it being pitched here in Washington as like, hey guys, the money's not being sent to Ukraine, it's being sent to our defense contractors. So it's good for the economy. I'm like, wait, what?
Multiple officials have said that now.
Yeah, I know.
Victoria Nuland came out and
Right.
said, we just got to keep in mind this money that we're sending to Ukraine. This is really going to our defense industrial complex. That is so sick. I can't even believe it. I can't even believe it. There was an executive from one of those companies that went to speak to college students in Texas, and they were getting all these questions about how much, if I go to work at your company, will I get to directly be involved in making the bombs that kill Palestinian children? And he was like, he had no idea how to do it. But the sickness of thinking that that's a reason to go to war, it's really, that's a mask-off moment, because that is a big part of the reason why we end up in these endless conflicts. Because there are people that are making a buck off of it. Not just making a buck, they are filthy rich. And they all live right around here, by the way.
Trust me.
There's a reason why McLean, Virginia is one of the wealthiest zip codes in the entire freaking country. It's because of these ghouls and that ideology of war is good for the economy. Sick. It is absolutely sick that they would make that argument, and it's extraordinarily revealing that they feel like that's the best that they can do at this point in terms of selling this for the American people. We were talking about this before, Saagar, but I do think it is worth noting. Now that you have the Israel war on Palestine, the Ukrainian cause, it really has taken a massive hit, because all of the aspirational ideological language about, it's a fight for democracy, and we're so principled, and human rights, and we're against these Russian war crimes and whatever. They can't even talk like that anymore. No. They don't even talk like that anymore. And actually, Jon Stewart made this very point in some of his dialogue in his show last night. We'll show you a little bit of in another segment. But, they can't even say those words because the hypocrisy is so blatant and so shameful that even these basically shameless people can't bring themselves to, say the words international rules-based order when we're there saying, basically we don't care about what the ICJ has to say, and we're going to argue on Israel's behalf that the occupation, the settlements aren't really illegal, or at least they're not, you're not the proper venue to be dealing with it. We can't really say what war crimes are when it comes to Israel. All of that has gone out the window. So now they're just left with it's good for the weapons makers to keep shipping these weapons and making more money. Insanity. So Russia annexing eastern Ukraine, illegal. Israel settlements, it's complicated. It's they both got a historical claim, right? That's the defense that all these people, this sanctimony that we have been subjected to over the last 2 years, it has been one of the great pleasures to watch it completely unwind. Just to make it all clear, though, by the way, in terms of NATO, just because Germany may be acting well in this one instance, there has been a major development, which we'd be remiss if we didn't go into. Put it up there on the screen, please. Officially yesterday, the Hungarian parliament voted for Stockholm, Sweden, to join the NATO alliance, clearing the way for all 32 countries for allow to its ascension. This is effectively very noteworthy because Sweden, I don't think a lot of people understand this, has had an official policy of neutrality for 200 years. They were actually neutral in the Second World War. A lot of U.S. airmen who had damaged aircraft actually went and landed in Sweden and were interred there. Apparently they had a good time whenever they were there. But my point just being even when the Nazis were around and the Russians, the Cold War, they had an official policy of neutrality. You really want to tell me that the things have changed so much for them to abandon it? Now listen, it's their right, but it's also our right not to allow them in. We've decided to. Finland and Sweden adding a huge border with Russia. We actually have a map that we can show everybody here. This is extraordinary. I mean, look at this new map of NATO. But if we go to the next one, guys, please, I want everybody to understand
just how much frontage has now been added for the overall NATO border. Look at that border, Krystal, between Finland and Russia. We are talking about some 800 miles of new territory that basically the United States is now set to defend, and of which we will go to nuclear war over. Finland, a country which has literally been at war with Russia and invaded by them previously. The theory being that we should extend it all the way over there to make sure that nothing happens. And lo and behold, what has been the effective result? Has Russia, invaded Finland and any of that? No. But guess what? They haven't backed down. They've increased defense spending, historic levels, not just to fund Ukraine. They've actually remilitarized their border with Finland. And both Finland and Sweden now, who were both under the 2% defense threshold, are doing everything in their power to try and meet to 2%, which, look, I guess if they're going to be in the alliance, at least I support that. But it's one of those where the circular logic of the war, it's like, we got to expand NATO to defend NATO. We got to defend Ukraine to defend NATO. It never ends. All it leads to is more of U.S. entrenchment on the continent, where nobody ever asks why it makes any strategic sense. Like, sorry, Finland, you guys have been invaded before. Are you really that critical to the U.S. economy? No, absolutely not. You people literally fought with the Nazis also in World War II. Like, we have to really think about what we're extending ourselves for. So I've been saving this rant for a while, but it's one of those where, you can't just let it pass, because it's one of those, that's just how North Macedonia got into the alliance. It's just how Montenegro, everybody just signs these people up as if there's no consequence to it. And then one day there really might be. And look at that border and tell me that you don't think nothing's going to happen.
Yeah, and remember those expansions happened under the supposedly anti-NATO Donald
under Trump.
So keep that in mind when you see this whole freak out. Oh my God, he's going to break up the NATO alliance. Really? Because he did the exact opposite last time he was in office. With regard to Finland, the Russians, the Kremlin spokesman Peskov told the BBC Russia be watching closely how NATO uses the Finnish territory, quote, in terms of basing weapon systems and infrastructure there, which will be right up close to our borders, potentially threatening us. Based on that, measures will be taken. So as far as I can tell, the entire logic of admitting Finland into NATO is basically like, oh, the Russians aren't going to like this.
Yeah, right. That's right.
So is that what our foreign policy is based around, like owning the Russians? Because what you're doing is you're creating more potential vectors of escalation, more potential vectors of conflict, and you're calling that improved security.
Right.
Not to mention, I mean, the discussion that you're having here about, hey, American people, like, are you ready to send your sons and daughters to, die for Finland or die for North Macedonia or whatever? That's never discussed in the U.S. press. I mean, really never discussed in the U.S. press.
Yeah.
And maybe the American people say, yeah, we believe in that, we think this is good for us, whatever. But the very fact that the debate doesn't even happen, it's just never spelled out what the implications actually are of this expansion. It's effectively taken as a given. It's accepted as just all upside, no downside, as a great way to own Putin, put him in his place and show him that we're going to do the thing he doesn't want us to do. And for what ultimately? So that's the other tragedy here is just, and this has been the case throughout the entire Ukraine war, is there's only ever been one side and one narrative presented. None of the potential follow-on costs and consequences have ever been laid out. And that's how you end up in a situation like we are right now and like the Ukrainians are right now that is horrible, absolutely horrible for everyone involved, with no end in sight and no plan for how we're going to ever resolve this conflict. That's how you end up there. So it is a troubling dynamic. There's just no doubt about it.
It's just one of those where, look, I can think about it in terms of economic terms. You know how much trade we do with Finland? $11 billion. Like, you want to go to nuclear war over $11 billion? Not everything is Munich. Not everything is World War II and the fall of France. It's the infection of the brain that, you can double NATO's border with Russia, and nobody talks about it. And think about it in terms also, not just, the nukes, because obviously it would get to there. Let's say it doesn't go nuclear and it's merely conventional. That means, just like in World War II, there are going to be guys from Kansas or wherever deployed up to the Arctic Circle to defend the territorial integrity of the Finnish-Russo border. Sorry, I don't think it's worth it. I think most people would agree with me if you actually put it up for a vote, but that's why it all just sneaks in, and then next thing you know, boom, you get involved in this and you never even had a say in the first place.
Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right, we're subscriber funded, we're building something new, we want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.